super excited. You know, we haven't done Christian formation in a very long time. We have not had confirmation classes in any regard for a very long time. So what I've done is I've tried to condense some of this because normally the classes were an hour long and they were 6, and I wanted to put 7 in. Because I didn't have enough time. If you went through it last time, you might remember that our time ended and I didn't finish. So what we did this time was we actually shortened it. It's 5 classes, but I didn't shorten the material. It's 5 classes in 45 minutes rather than 7 classes in an hour. So what we did was we took some of the material from a couple of the other classes and we blended them in. So hopefully I'll be able to get through some of this. I do have... Thank you. I do have a couple of things that I want to say just in the beginning because it was part of the opening class. This is only for those that are being confirmed mostly. But it's good for everybody to hear. If you are here to be confirmed for any other reason than that there's a desire in my heart to confirm my faith in Jesus Christ, I will fully encourage you that you can leave if you would like, and you have my support and my blessing, and I will talk to your grandmother or to your parents and let them know that that's not there and you don't need to do this. And the reason for that is that confirmation is not a rite of passage that you hit a certain age and now you're ready to be confirmed. Confirmation is not my grandmother wants me to be confirmed, so I'm going to do it, or my dad or my mom or my sister did this. The only reason that somebody gets confirmed is because they have a desire in their heart to confirm what was spoken of them over baptism. See, we already did that in baptism. You already, the parents or the grandparents already said, we're going to raise this child up as a Christian, and they had no say in that. So what confirmation is I want to now confirm what was spoken of me in my baptism. So it should always be coming from a desire within somebody's heart to be confirmed rather than any other reason. I did this speech in Myrtle Beach. I was the youth minister, and the youth minister did the teens, and the priest did the adults. I did this speech, and I had an individual stand up and just walk right out, and he had my full blessing. It really is something that we do as a desire from our heart. So that's my speech. Do what you want with it. Bishop is coming on the 9th. If you go through the classes, you will be confirmed. I'm just giving you the speech to say it could be more meaningful later if it's not what's in your heart right now. So that's the speech. What I did with this is we've got 5 classes that we're going to walk through, and this time I switched the order, and the reason that I switched the order is because I think it makes better sense. The history of the Anglican Church gives you a lot of material, a lot of understanding. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to start with the history first. And if you understand the history, you'll understand the theology of the Anglican Church, and then you'll understand our liturgy. But all of that is based on understanding the history of how we came into being. And the good news in that, and I know there are people out there that are like, history's horrible, and some of it is. But the good news about that is that there's no more exciting history than the Reformation and the English Reformation. It's a lot of fun. So I'm going to walk you through it. There's some really funny things that take place. There's some really cool things that take place. Because I don't have time to go over the entire Reformation, the German Reformation under Martin Luther, I'm going to give you the high points because you have to understand what's taking place in Germany to then be able to understand what takes place in England. Let's see here. Let's see what I missed. Mark, I need it on the history. It's the who we are. It's number 4, I think. I don't know why you would do that. It should be blue. Nope. It should be blue. Maybe it's 5. Yeah. Let's give it a shot. While Mark's getting that up, I'm gonna give you the overview of the German Reformation. Okay, the German Reformation is Martin Luther is a monk. He's a monk in a monastery, and he's a really good monk, and he keeps getting promoted. And eventually, Martin Luther gets promoted to be the people's priest, which means that he is the priest in that community of people. He's the priest in Wittenberg. So he's the priest there. He's the people's priest. And because Martin Luther has such a personality, like a type A personality, like if he's given a job, that's his job, he's going to do his job, he takes it very seriously. And so as things begin to develop, Rome is trying to build St. Peter's Basilica, and they need money, and they have a practice of selling indulgences, and so they're going to send out, they're basically salespeople, and the guy that goes to Martin Luther's area, his name's John Tetzel, and he goes and he's selling indulgences. An indulgence is if your great aunt, who you love, died, you could give a certain amount of money, and if you gave a certain amount of money, then she would be set free from purgatory sooner. She wouldn't have to suffer the pains of purgatory. So you can imagine how much you're pulling on the heartstrings of people. Anybody who has a loved one that they died, somebody comes and they say, if you just give some money, then your loved one will be set free from purgatory. So John Tetzel comes into town, and he's got a little jingle. It says, as soon as the coin clings, the soul springs from purgatory. He's got a little jingle that he says. He's a really good salesman. And Martin Luther greets him, and he kicks him out. And so he kicks him out of his region, but as any good salesman, he is persistent. So he just goes to the next region. And it's just a border. There's no wall. There's just a border. You just walk over. Okay, here we are. We're here. And so Martin Luther, his people begin hearing that John Tetzel is selling indulgences just right over the border. And so they start going. And this enrages Martin Luther. And so he actually goes to address Rome on the matter. Because Martin Luther is convinced that Rome doesn't know what's taking place. So he goes, and what he finds in Rome is a total disaster. A moral disaster. And so it really, what began with indulgences begins to be Martin Luther's kind of attack on Rome because of the moral failures of that church, of the Roman church. And so we're going to skip a lot of history here, a lot of really cool events. But what ends up happening is there's a conflict between Martin Luther and Rome. And any time in the past that this has happened, what the Roman church does is they just kill the individual that they're in conflict with. End of story. And so they tried to do it with Martin Luther. In fact, they put a pretty big bounty on Martin Luther's head, but the people love him. The people love him because he's given them their religion back. He's taken the religion from the church and he's given it back to the people. So when when Rome puts a bounty on Martin Luther, nobody ever captures him and nobody ever turns him into Rome. The significance of that is that it's the first person who has ever challenged the Roman church and lived to tell about it. Now, once that happens, you're going to see that all sorts of people begin following suit because it's never happened before. You know how to get a better clicker. So Martin Luther is just the beginning, and you're going to see, wow, that's really small. I'm going to have to make that bigger for next week. You can't read that, but I pretty much know what it says. So Martin Luther is going to be the beginning of what's going to spread all across Europe. And my clicker's not working, so Mark, so if you can just click through. There's a map up there, but that's pointless. I'll make it bigger for next week. So you'll see that in Switzerland there's reformers, in France there's reformers, everywhere throughout Europe Reformation's taking place. And it's all taking place because one man was able to stand up to Rome and not get killed. And so what begins taking place is all this Reformation starts happening, but there's a couple places where Reformation doesn't happen in the initial phase. Does anybody have any ideas where Reformation is not happening in Europe in the initial phases? Well, obviously, Rome. You're going to see it in Spain, not as prolific as in other places, but you will see it. But there's one place where Reformation is completely absent. England. England, Ireland, Scotland, there's no Reformation. So the latter Reformation is England and Scotland. That's the latter Reformations. They take place much later than the first Reformation. So now I'll actually be able to walk you through the first kind of Reformation. And all right, so click through that slide. This will get better. The clicker will get better, and the slides will get bigger. So you're going to see that there's one place, one kind of big region that it's not taking place. And so what we're moving into is the English Reformation. When does this take place? So it takes place much later. You can skip through. You can put up that whole thing. So what begins happening in England is that Martin Luther's books are banned. Okay? Nobody's allowed to read Martin Luther's books. They're all burned. They're all banned. And so, but what happens is that they keep getting in. So you all know whenever you ban something, what does that generally do? It creates an interest. All of a sudden, people want to know, well, why? Why is it banned? I must have it. And so all of a sudden, Martin Luther's books start gaining traction in England because there's a ban that no one's allowed to have it, and there's all these books being burned that are Martin Luther's. So they keep moving in, so much so that there are certain pockets that are known as Lutheran like hotspots in England. That the bar up there that I'm showing you, it's basically a bar, was known as Little Germany. And it's where all of the reforming kind of minds would hang out. And they would talk about their Reformation ideas. So even though you're trying to keep Luther's ideas out of England, they're still finding their way in there. And so what you find is that you're going to find several reformers in England that come from unlikely sources. And the first that you're going to find is William Tyndale. And William Tyndale is, all that William Tyndale does is he tutors children. And he tutors them in religion, he tutors them in math, he tutors them in everything. but he's a brilliant scholar. He is also very much interested in Reformation taking place in England. And there's some really cool things that take place that he's going to say. And I do need that quote. If you can bring that quote up. His most famous quote is right here. He says, "If God spare my life or many years, I will cause a boy that driveth the plow shall know more of the scriptures than thou dost." So what he's doing is he's talking to scholars, and he's saying, if I can live for many years, my life will be dedicated to making it so that a boy that works on a farm will know the scriptures better than the scholars do today. And I want you to remember that quote because it's a really important quote. You move on to the next one and bring the whole thing up. So his life work is on translating the Bible. And he's going to translate the Bible into, he's going to translate the New Testament from the Greek and Aramaic into English. So he's going to translate the Bible. It takes him 5 years from the original languages, and he actually gets it published right where Martin Luther gave his "Here I Stand" speech. When the church in Rome asked him to recant, and Martin Luther asked for more time. And he takes more time, and then he comes before them. They assume that he's going to recant. And instead, Martin Luther says that my heart is captive to Scripture. Here I stand. I cannot recant what I said. William Tyndale is going to get his New Testament published in the same place where Martin Luther gave that speech. It's a beautifully and accurate written translation. It's a really cool translation. So what you have is Tyndale has thousands of copies brought in to England. I think it's like 16,000. It's probably on a later slide. But he has like 16,000 copies brought in. When Tyndale's Bible comes into England, so does Protestant theology, because the words are different. And I gave you some examples up there. So instead of translating it "do penance," it's translated as "repent." Instead of it being a priest, it's translated as "seniors." Instead of it being the church, it was "congregation." Instead of it being confession, it was acknowledgement. Instead of charity, now it's love. All of those very Roman words are changed into Protestant ideas. And the Bible coming in brings that theology, that theological change with it. And this is why Rome wants to keep the Bible out, because those words have significant meaning. And although those words are very similar, they have a very nuanced meaning to them. And they're important. So his theology comes in with the Bible. It's not well received by clergy, and just like with Martin Luther's books, they burned William Tyndale's. But it doesn't do anything to William Tyndale, though. William Tyndale just continues. If you go to that next slide, and he's going to start translating the Old Testament. The problem is that Rome doesn't give up, and eventually they catch him, and he is sentenced to be strangled and then burned at the stake, in which he is strangled. And then Rome has a tendency, medieval Rome has a tendency to overkill. And so you'll see that there are times where somebody will be sentenced to what seems rather extreme. So he is sentenced to be strangled and then burned at the stake. But he has one final word. And his final word, right before he's being burned, is Lord, please open the King of England's eyes. That's it. Please open the King of England's eyes. So the question is, who's the King of England? What's that? Henry VIII. So you got Henry VIII is the King of England at that time. This is a beautiful picture of Henry VIII. He's if you've heard stories, he's a horrible individual. But he is the reason that England was brought into Reformation. So as horrible and despicable as you may think that he is, there are at least something good that came about from his life. And so, let's go back. So, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. The king is Henry VIII. And then you've got Henry VIII is a devout Roman Catholic. Okay? There's a couple of things that you need to know about Henry VIII. He is a devout Roman Catholic who would go through voluntarily, by the way, he would go through 3 services a day. 3 morning, evening, and noonday. He would have church service. And he would actually assist the priest in those services. He was as devout a Roman Catholic as they come. In fact, he argued against Luther and was awarded the Defender of the Faith title for arguing against Luther and the Reformation. It's a title that the Queen of England still has today, the Defender of the Faith. It's a title that's been passed down throughout the years. It starts with Henry VIII and his opposition to the Reformation. He's also awarded the Golden Rose, which is a token of reverence and affection. He is well loved by Rome, and he loves Rome. So those are really important things to know. And when Tyndale is about to die, his final words are, "Open the eyes of the king." And what you're going to find is, here comes the problem with Henry VIII. There has to be a problem that's going to propel Henry VIII to leave Rome. Not just anything is going to cause this. So what causes him to leave? The problem is his marriage. He is married to Catherine of Aragon. Beautiful picture. Strange picture. She is formerly married to Henry's older brother, Arthur. And if you're familiar with Leviticus, which I'm sure most of you don't know, because I didn't know, but there is a prohibition against marrying your brother's widow. You're not allowed to do it. Don't marry your brother's widow. She and Catherine of Aragon was married to his brother. His brother dies, and then Henry VIII marries her. And he had to get a special dispensation to do so. He had to appeal to the Pope, which I think is Pope Julius, to get a special dispensation to do so. Mark, if you go ahead. It's Leviticus 20:21. If you ever want to read it, there it is. Don't marry your brother's widow. So he's going to get a special dispensation, by Pope Julius to marry Catherine of Aragon, which he does. Then problem continued is that Catherine has not produced a male heir. And whether it's her fault or not, during that time, it was her fault. And in the eyes of Henry, it was her fault. And that's all that matters. We know differently today, but during that time, it was her fault. She needed to be able to do this. So she is nearing the age of not being able to have children anymore. And this is going to pose a problem because Henry only has one child, and it's a daughter. And England already had one female monarch. Her name was Matilda. It was a total disaster. And Henry knows that England is not ready for another female monarch. It's just not a good thing. Henry needs an heir, and he needs an heir right away. Okay? So, what the other thing that's taking place, because these things are taking place simultaneously, he does not have a male heir, and on the other side, he does have a mistress, which was quite common at that time. Not necessarily common today, more common than it should, but he does have a mistress, and he is in love with his mistress, Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn is with child, Henry's child. Maybe it's a boy. The problem is if that child is born and they're not married, the child is going to be labeled a bastard, and it will not be able to be considered an heir to the throne. So Henry is on a bit of a time crunch. So you can see that he's got a problem with his current wife, and he's got a problem with his mistress, and both of them can be solved with one thing. So the solution is, he believes, first of all, that his marriage is cursed because of Leviticus chapter 20, verse 21. He believes that he's not been given a male heir because he was never supposed to be married. Now, do you think that he actually believes that? Or do you think that he's just using this as a justification? I think he's just using it as a justification. But his heart also is with Anne Boleyn, who has a child, who that child could be a boy, and all of his problems can be solved rather easily. All he has to do is go to Rome and get an annulment. All he has to do is get the Pope to say that you should have never been married to Catherine of Aragon because that was your brother's widow, and Leviticus 20 prohibits that. Right? Sounds easy? Well, it's not so easy. You got the whole thing. There's two problems with this. The first problem is the small problem. And the small problem is you have to try to convince one pope to undo a dispensation of another pope, which is rather tricky because they have this very strange doctrine in there of papal infallibility. And because the Pope is considered to be infallible when talking on matters of doctrine or decisions on matters of doctrine, you have to find a Pope that would be willing to undo an infallible decision of a previous Pope. That's a little tricky. But if you have enough power, if you have enough influence, you all know this from anything, you can grease the wheels a bit and make that happen. And trust me, Henry has enough power and enough influence to make this happen. This is a small problem. It's probably something that they're going to have to finesse a little bit, that they're going to have to maneuver around, but it is a rather small problem because of how beloved Henry is by Rome and how much Henry loves Rome. So this is something that they could do. There's a bigger problem, though. And the bigger problem is who he's actually married to. Because he's currently married to Catherine of Aragon. And Catherine of Aragon is not just any woman. She is the aunt of Charles V, who is the king of Spain, who is right as this is taking place. You can go past that slide. She is the aunt of Charles V, the king of Spain, and Spain and England are kind of in conflict right now. It's kind of strange that there's some rogue soldiers who have moved in on England, and so in some ways the Pope is held captive by Charles V. So the one person that he cannot anger is Charles V. And putting his aunt out is most certainly going to do that. So the bigger problem is who Catherine of Aragon is. Now, at some times in history, the Pope has more power than kings and emperors. But in other periods, the kings and the emperors have more power. And it just depends on the circumstances of where you're at. So I put up there a picture, and that is a picture of actually the Pope, who is Pope Clement VII, who is crowning Charles V as emperor of the Roman Empire. So the emperor of the Roman Empire has a lot of power, right? But what about the person that actually crowns the emperor? How much power is there? There's a significant, and by the way, this is the last emperor that was ever crowned by the Pope. But there's a significant amount of power maneuvering that has taken place here, because what the Pope did was he wiggled his way in and said and argued that we should be the one to crown the emperors, and it was given to them. But with that action comes great power in and of itself, that they are the ones that actually crown the emperor. So there's some maneuvering between who has the power and who doesn't. And but at this point in history, Charles V has the power. So the Pope cannot undo a marriage that's going to make Charles V angry. And that's the moral of the story there. So what Henry VIII thought was going to be just a formality is anything but. So if you could go through, there's a great picture of Henry VIII. This is kind of the image that most people have of Henry VIII. Henry VIII just assumed that this was going to immediately just take place. They love me, I love them, do me a favor, we should be good. The annulment to the marriage is denied. And it's denied because the Pope can't anger Charles V. So what Henry VIII has to do is be creative. And so here's what Henry VIII is going to come up with. And if you go ahead to that next slide, Henry VIII is going to come up with an academic route. So what he does is he gathers all the great scholars in the region, and he wants them to put their minds together so that they can come up with a great argument on why Henry is right, that he never should have been married to Catherine, and that the Pope has no right to stop this annulment from taking place. And so what this committee is going to do is they're going to find a giant loophole. Now, the loophole's not going to work, but it is cool historically. So I'm going to share it with you. So Joseph of Arimathea planted the first church in England. And the church in that would make the church in England the oldest church. Rome has established their authority over everybody else by saying, we're the oldest church planted by St. Peter. And so if England can show that they're the oldest church, then they can undo that argument, and therefore Rome has no authority over England, because England predates them. So you have no authority. Now, again, the loophole doesn't work, but it is kind of cool. So go ahead right to that next slide. So what Henry's going to do is he's going to begin separating from Rome. And so the plan, what he knows that he has to do is separate from Rome, because Rome's not going to give him the annulment. And he needs the annulment. So he's going to separate from Rome, And he's going to start doing it with these very small little steps. And I'll walk you through these steps because they're small, but they're significant. So first, Henry makes several moves, and the first thing is he's secretly going to get married. We're just going to do this. We're getting married, and this is how this is going. Because if she gives birth and they're not married, then that child is not going to be an heir. The second thing that he does is he appoints Thomas Cranmer to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is a strange appointment. Thomas Cranmer isn't even in England at the time. He is on a special mission from England into Germany. So Thomas Cranmer's been spending lots of time in Germany. And so he's not even in England. Also, Thomas Cranmer has Reformation tendencies. He is not necessarily loyal to Rome like Henry VIII is. So he appoints Thomas Cranmer as Archbishop of Canterbury. Next thing, and then he stops sending Rome money. If you ever want to get somebody's attention, stop sending them money. In fact, we just got a bill from the diocese saying you came up short this year. You don't even have to stop sending them money. You just have to send them not enough money, and you will get their attention, and they will immediately come back to you and say, whoa, what's happening here? And so what England is going to do is that they stop sending them money. But these are all relatively small moves. You're going to see that there's a really big move that's going to take place. That's on the next slide. If you could go towards that, bring it all up. You're going to have the Act of Supremacy. And the Act of Supremacy takes place in 1534, and this is where it proclaims Henry to be the supreme authority of the English church. So now Rome essentially has no authority over the English church. Henry has all the authority. And this is why in England you still have that connection between the secular and the religious, because the secular has religious authority, which it doesn't have in the United States. So what you've got is immediately, the moment that this happens, is a welcome to the Reformation England. England is now moving into the Reformation. What's interesting about this, though, is that in every other place where Reformation happened, it was because you had men and women with really strong religious convictions that what was taking place in Rome was wrong and we need to separate. That's not what you have in England. What you have in England is a political reformation. Henry needs to separate from Rome so that he can have an heir to the throne, which is a political decision, not a religious decision. So in England, it's a political reformation and not a religious reformation. For now. It will become a religious reformation because of Thomas Cranmer. But that's later on. So you've got this political reformation that's taking place in England. So if you could go ahead. So certainly the Church of England walked away from Roman authority, but they didn't walk away from the doctrines. All the doctrines are still in place. They didn't change one single doctrine from the Roman Church to England. And so all that is still in place. Again, it's a political reformation. Until, and if you go ahead to that next slide and bring it all down, until you, go back a bit, until you have Thomas Cranmer coming back from Germany. Now, what do you think takes place? Remember, y'all remember where the Reformation started, right? Germany. What do you think takes place if you take an individual from England who has Reformation tendencies and you put him in Germany for an extended period of time? yeah, he was definitely educated. He's going to come back as a Reformation Anglican. He's going to come back in the mold of Martin Luther, Philip Melanchthon, John Calvin. He's going to come back in the mold of John Wycliffe. He's going to be a reformer. The guy that you sent will not come back the same. And he doesn't. And when Thomas Cranmer comes back, he comes back as a very different individual. And in fact, when he comes back, he travels with a box, a big box that looks like that. It's the strangest thing. He never had the box before. Now when he travels with a box. The great question, and I'm going to end on this, the great question for you all is, what is in the box? And if you already sat through this, don't answer. What's in the box? What's that? Oh, that's a really good guess, but no, it's cooler than that. What's that? It is. When Thomas Cranmer is in Germany, he secretly gets married. And what's in the box is his wife who's traveling with him. And the reason she's in a box is because nobody can know that he's married, because as a priest, he can't be married. So she's moving and traveling with him. It's this... Now that would never fly today. I can't imagine me pulling out the box for my wife. But it is a really cool kind of love story where you've got this woman that wants to be with her husband enough that she's willing to travel with him in a box, and a husband that's willing to risk everything to have his wife with him. I think it's cool. You've got to place it in the time. Now again, today, it's never going to fly. But in its time, I personally think it's really cool. So I don't know how much he traveled with the box, but sometimes he traveled with a box, and his wife was in the box, because nobody can know. It's a really interesting thing. But when Thomas Cranmer comes back, what you're going to find is, and next week's really cool, but you're going to find this tension between a political reformation and a spiritual reformation. And the tension exists between Thomas Cranmer and Henry VIII. And I'm going to end right there, because I made it actually right to the point that I planned on, which is pretty amazing. And we'll finish out the history next week. But know that most of the important history I'm going to give you next week. And the reason that it's important is it will help you understand the theology that we have, what we believe, and then all that will help you understand why we do what we do in our church services, and why we don't do some things in our church services. So all of it's really leading up to giving you a fuller understanding of what it means when we gather here as a body. So I thank you for coming, and if you are here for the late service, you've got like 13 minutes for coffee. If you are for the early service, I'll see you next week.